First the speeches, right?
Okay, sorry, what?
First, we'll go with our speeches and then you can ask us questions, right?
Acha, sorry, my bad,
Okay, okay,
sorry.
okay.
Yes.
I was actually giving the answer to, I think, Paki's question, and the meeting stopped in between. I would like to
I
continue
think
my
you
answer.
answered.
My answer was actually not completed. So could I just,
Go on.
okay, okay. Okay, so yes, let's absolutely design policies around needs, but we must also recognize that gender itself is a predictor of need. Because of its social structures in place, ignoring gender entirely would mean repeating the same mistakes we have seen in past disasters, where women's safety and dignity were compromised not by nature, but by negligence. So let's not choose between gender and needs. Let's use both lenses because that's how the policy designing that's actually responsive, not just theoretical.
Yep, opposition, you can start with your speeches.
Okay, awesome. Ladies and gentlemen, today the proposition wants us to believe that in the middle of a raging flood, collapsing buildings, and mass panic, the disaster response team should pause and ask, excuse me, are you a woman? I have a separate rescue plan for you. Really? Let me be clear. Disasters do not discriminate. They don't check your gender before striking. Earthquakes don't knock on doors and ask, is this a woman's house? They just shake everything down. Yes, I agree that women face unique challenges in disaster, but so do the elderly, children, disabled, and people with chronic illnesses. Special focus on women might portray them as vulnerable and victims, reinforcing gender stereotypes that they have spent years trying to clear. A policy made specifically for women will actually isolate them further. Prioritizing one specific group might divert crucial resources away from others in dire need, which are not specifically women. Need-based policies should address specific needs without necessarily labeling them as women issues. Because disasters don't cite a specific gender. Disasters demand urgency and not identity labels. Overcomplicating emergency response with gender policy risks delays and can cost precious lives. We are against this policy because when the flood water rises, no one says, save me, I'm a woman, but rather save me because I'm a human. And that's exactly how our policies should respond.
So now should I start?
Yeah, you should go.
So I'm speaking against the motion that we should have gender specific disaster reforms. There are so many categories aside from women that are so vulnerable to these disasters. And it's not practical to have different reforms for each one of those categories. But a plan that is equal and is considering all those categories together to have something that would actually be productive and theoretically possible. Socially, equality should be considered first because as we see right now, somewhere in our mind we all are misogynistic. So even when we have proper reforms that only target women, at the end a person's human's personal biasness might come in between. So first of all we should have a social equality and then we should focus on these reforms, but till then we should focus on neutral reforms that help everyone and do not leave everything behind. As my opponents give the example of an attack where 70% of victims were women. Now, if you introduce gender specific reforms, then maybe there would be 50% of women that are being victims. But there will be addition of other categories that were left behind, and it solves nothing until and unless women overcome the stigma, the society as a whole overcome the stigma of not learning some specific skills because they are restricted to some gender. I think the main problem here is to change the perspective of society to be more equal, and then can we have reforms that are gender specific that would be productive. Thank you.
Okay, so Jayant, would you like uh, ask a question to Paki? Till then, Nishita is joining.
Could you ask from the side of proposition? Because I'm having a very specific question for Nishita herself. So yeah.
अरे यार सेम भाई ठीक है ओके नेवर माइंड wait um, just a sec. Okay. If you believe focusing on women is discriminatory, how do you justify the fact that during Cyclone Sidr in Bangladesh, women and girls were disappropriately affected because men were prioritized for rescue and relief services?
First of all, I don't believe that women should be discriminated as such. I am saying that there is a stigma and it is among every person, even the people who are supposed to help us. So even if we reform it, if a women's family is against swimming, and if we still have a reform, disaster reform, that women should be helped first, the women still can't swim. That's the point, because the society does not allow or does not approve of it. So first we should overcome what society is thinking of us, and then we can have these disaster reforms.
Fair enough.
That was the reason I didn't go against Paki.
Is Nishita going to join back? Like, is anyone
I
communicating with her?
mean,
She's
she's
trying.
trying. Yes.
Okay, so till that, if it's okay with you, Paki, I would like to ask you a couple of questions as rebuttals. Okay. So yeah, you mentioned that gender-specific policies could create division. Are you suggesting that recognizing different needs is decisive rather than necessary?
I think when you're talking about the fact that there should be specific reforms for women, then one day disability people will come and they will also suggest that we should also have some categories. So it is absolutely a necessity to consider each and everyone, but limiting it only to some gender is creating a victim mindset. That now, instead, what we have seen right now, that because of the inability of like the caregivers who are supposed to save us, the women have become self-independent. But if we have some very specific reforms that only apply to women, then we'll have this victim mindset that someone is going to save us, and that will hinder our growth. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, that answers my question. And yeah, Nishita was unable to join due to some network error, so she just messaged me and yeah. Okay, so the debate is over. If you have any question for the proposition, you may ask Paki.
Like, I had one question. I think one of you mentioned that the women don't have specific period healthcare needs, like they don't even have the basic hygiene needs. So I would like to say, ask you a question. Isn't it part of basic healthcare and not something that is only restricted to women? Like everyone should have basic hygiene, and I think periods come in basic hygiene that should be available to all. So it's not something that we should include in women specific reforms.
Would you be going, Pranad, or should I go to her answer?
I mean, I never mentioned the facts which she told. I mean,
Okay.
it's
Okay.
better for you to
So,
go.
So yeah, Paki, I specifically mentioned that not women's are, having that mindset of getting hygiene. I mentioned that in disaster time, women's have minimal to zero time for the management of hygiene. And they, in the disaster kits, it's always not necessary that in every disaster kits, there's a sanitary pad or like there's some instructions for women or there is clean water for women. So it's really hard for women to, you know, get through their periods through disaster times or in the camps. So yeah, I mentioned that.
I wanted to cross question you about the answer. Like you said, like in some places there might not be periods pads available and sanitary napkins available. So that's what I'm saying, that in so many places, especially countries where they are economically weak, they have terrible disaster management. They don't have basic bandages even. So someone could treat their injury, which is like basic first aid, right? And the sanitary napkin should in itself, without even having an argument about it, that they should be there in basic first aid. So when we are looking, like what I was trying to ask was that right now in some countries, there is so much disparity that their already disaster policies are so bad that even after reforming it and catering it towards women, they will be worse than they are now. That's what I was trying to convey with that question.
Okay, so thank you. That's a really important concern. And I completely agree with you. Your observation in many places, disaster management is already weak, undifferented, and chaotic. But I'd argue that's exactly why we need to make sure what little support is available is used intelligently and fairly. You mentioned that even basic medical supplies like bandages are missing, which are first aids. And you are right, that's unacceptable. But when resources are scarce, prioritizing based on real needs becomes even more crucial. If sanitary napkins are left out, despite being a necessity for half of the population, we are not just missing a box on the checklist, we are saying women's dignity and health are optional. And that's not just fair, it's inefficient because lack of menstrual hygiene leads to infection, missed aid restoration, and even early evacuation of all of which burden the already struggling system. You are right, disaster policies need reform everywhere, but reform doesn't mean doing less. It means doing better by making sure no group is consistently left behind, especially in low resource settings. Targeted planning actually makes the system more efficient, not less. So, this isn't about adding luxury, it's about recognizing the basic needs vary and real resilience comes from meeting them with clarity, not uniformity.
Another, the question that you had for Nishita, if you would put it forward, maybe I could try to answer it. Or like,
Okay,
should we
no
leave the
problem. She
meeting?
answered it in chat, but yeah, as you said, you are going to answer it. I'm putting it forward. So thank you, but with all due respect, Nishita, no, Nishita, not Paki. No one saying disaster responders should ask, are you a woman before saving someone? You are saying before disaster hits, plans must account for real, reoccurring challenges women face, like lack of access to hygiene, higher risk of violence in shelters, and being left out of warning or decisions. This isn't about identity politics, it's about effective planning. And yes, others like them, elderly and disabled, deserve support too, but policies already exist for many of them. Women's needs are often overlooked entirely. Disaster may not discriminate, but systems often do. And if we are want truly human policies, we have to make sure no one's really is ignored.
Shall I like add up my small question with it?
Yeah.
Okay. Um, just a sec. Yeah. So Nishita mentioned that disasters do not discriminate against women, but how do you reconcile this with the extensive evidence that women are 14 times more likely to die during disasters than men, as mentioned by the UN, as shown in multiple studies? For instance, during 1991. Uh, okay. Sorry. For instance, during 1991 cyclone in Bangladesh, 90% of the casualties were women, and during the 2004 Indian Ocean tsunami, approximately 70% of of those who perished were women. Would you not agree that these statistics highlight clear and undeniable gender-based disparities in disaster impacts?
As Nishita would say, that like she agrees that this is all true, but she also would like to point out that during these disaster there is so much chaos, and how much the workload on the people that are supposed to save us is so much that when you put special needs and cares which is not uniform for everybody, it will be highly impossible to give efficient help. So if like when we have like disaster reforms, they are usually uniform, so everyone should try to be treated equal. And it is also not a secret that women have a higher life expectancy, and in the cases where there is an infectious or parasitic disaster, it is more likely that men are more the victims. And like this would pros the fact that for different situations there are different people who are much more likely to be vulnerable.
I believe
Okay,
now all
thank you,
questions
Paki.
are settled. Or no?
If is if it's okay, then I would like to add up Nishita's point of view in this meeting. I know I am speaking from the
Go on, go on.
proposition team. Okay. So thank you for that response. But with all due respect, let's unpack the assumptions behind it. Yes, you say disaster responders won't stop to ask, are you a woman? But by insisting on gender specific plans, you are building systems that do exactly that in their design phase. You may not be dividing people at the point of rescue, but you are dividing them at the point of planning. You say that isn't identity politics if it's effective planning, but effective planning is about needs, not labels, hygiene, privacy, safety in shelters. We agree those matter, but those are not exclusively women's issue. The moment you frame them as such, you risk overlooking others. And about women being excluded from warnings or decisions, that's a governance failure, not a disaster policy issue. Let's empower women as leaders in disaster planning, not just recipients of aid. That's real equality. And lastly, you say that already have policies. Well, clearly those policies weren't enough either, because disasters continue to affect many groups disproportionately. This solution isn't clearing out more separate lanes. It's building one stronger, inclusive roads that lifts everyone together. So yes, disaster don't discriminate, hence policies shouldn't either. And I would like Pranag, you are recording this meeting. So could you send me the recorded file of this meeting?
Yeah, works. Okay, guys,
And
thank you for
also,
joining. Yes, sorry.
just like a question I had for Jayan, that like, how do you write your speeches? Like, do you like make it up, or
Wait,
like, are you
let me stop my recording first.